Content over everything. You should come stand with me for a minute, just for a slow minute. Let people see what you wear. Let that show. You see that? We ain't joking. This is Kaptan. This is Hausa or Yoruba. This is Nigerian. It can be Malian. It could be Guinean. It could be Senegalese. It's West African. So it is possible to be a good Muslim and a good African.
Yes. And a just person as well.
People ask you to make a choice, they're expecting you to make what you call a false choice.
Yes.
The only people who will try to confuse you, confusing ethnicity and religion, are you know who? The people who say Al-Quds belongs to them when it does not. They're the only people who are trying. Look, that is not a democracy. Everybody talks about it being a democracy. It's an ethnocracy. If those people are a race and not a religion, then it's an ethnocracy. What country am I talking about?
Israel.
Of course. I just wanted to see if y'all up with what it's not Barakallah fiqh. Speaking of which, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al-mursaleen ajma'in wa ba'd. Last week, I raised a fairly controversial subject, and that subject was basically my resentment at people who single out Muslims for mistakes all humans make. All human societies are subject to error, and to take out only the Muslims in an ahistorical manner, I felt was doing them an injustice. So, contrary to most people, I did not come last week to deny that Muslims have made the mistake that we discussed last week. I was putting it in its historical context, saying it's a part of what humans were doing before Muslims came on the scene. It was practiced by the pagan Byzantines when they became Christians and Byzantium became Constantinople. They continued this practice, and when Islam conquered that part of the world, the practice continued. And it was not a Muslim practice. It's not a Christian practice. It's not a pagan practice. It's one of these things that humans have been doing for a very long time. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Right.
We watched it last week.
You watched the video. I'm discussing something. I see children in the audience, so I'm hesitant. I don't know how to say the word. But no, it's all right. I think that I try to do my videos in a way where children can listen to it and get something out of it. But what happened was this, and I actually have it on my phone, and the best thing I should do is bring it up on my phone and read it. What happened was, there was a post by a very celebrated scholar from Senegal called Sheikh Anta Diop. And he, in one of his books, was putting forward the argument that Islam was not spread in Black Africa by the sword or by force. And he was correct. So I put this article on social media saying that this is one of the lesser known utterances of Sheikh Anta Diop that other Afrocentrists should know about. They should balance what he says about ancient Egypt with this. If he's right about ancient Egypt, perhaps he's also right about this. To which many people replied saying, well, wait a minute. Islam did come to Africa by force, and worst of all, Muslims were involved in castrating males. So I then had to say, look, I have a problem with people who do history in a very strange way. They select a target in their sights, and to the exclusion of everything around them, they focus on that target. And when you open the lens, when you step back from the camera and you widen the lens, you realize that everybody around that target was doing the same thing. And that's what I wanted to say last week. what I went on to say, but I got interrupted. It was raining. I was very, very discombobulated by the weather. That's why I'm wearing this very heavy coat this week. What I wanted to say last week was the book that was written saying that Muslims castrated boys before dragging them, kicking and screaming across the Sahara from Black Africa to North Africa for sale. I was saying at the end of the book that quoted that, the guy also spoke about the Nation of Islam in America. Now this book is meant to be about African slaves who are Muslim, and all of a sudden at the end it starts talking about the Nation of Islam. It also makes unnecessary disclosures, like Farrakhan's father is a white man. And you wonder, what does this have to do? It is not germane to the text. And then you realize the book has an agenda. The Nation of Islam had written a book called The Secret Relationship Between the Blacks and the Jews, detailing the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade and the extent to which certain, choosing my words carefully, certain Jewish communities, financiers, were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. The Nation of Islam has never been forgiven for writing that book. They've never forgiven them for writing that book. And in the early days of Farrakhan's rise to prominence, he was more vocally anti-capitalist Jew. Not a problem with the Jewish community per se, but the extent to which in places like Chicago and New York, they run the rental slums, where a lot of poor people live, and they make a lot of money off of that. And Farrakhan especially had an animus against Mayor Koch at the time in New York. And a bunch of scholars got together and wrote this book called The Secret Relationship. Now, apparently, Ronald Segal's book, Islam's Black Slaves, was a counterblast to that book, stating at the end of the book, completely out of left field, here is Farrakhan, whose father is white, called him a white man, maybe like how Malcolm X's mother was not light, all right, but not quite white. You know what Caribbean fair-skinned people can be. But this guy felt the need to say, here is Farrakhan, whose father is white, writing this, and so on. So I realized this book he'd written talking about all these blacks who were castrated and dragged across the Sahara, explaining the absence of black people in the Middle East, despite so many hundred years of slavery. Could you just all these years of slavery? I said, well, look, number one, why can't we posit? Why can't we posit that there were fewer people actually captured in the trans-Saharan slave trade? Let us posit that. Instead of saying there were just as many millions as in the transatlantic slave trade, here's Ronald Segal saying these people were captured, castrated, and then he gives figures stating how many amongst the captured and castrated died from the brutality of the operation, the manner in which the operation was carried out. Then you ask yourself, how could people capturing slaves with spears, swords, and arrows, the same weapons as they, how could they manage to castrate them and then drag them across the desert? How can they walk successfully? First of all, the first time you do it, you realize it's so economically unviable, you wouldn't do it a second time. It costs too much to cap. It's not like you're coming with, I'm repeating what I said last week just to summarize that. It's not like you're coming with weapons, superior weaponry, cannon, guns, muskets, gunpowder. You're not coming, which would make it easier for you to round up a village of people. No. The people who came across the Sahara came with arrows and bows. and swords and knives. How could they capture all these people, castrate all these boys, and then walk them across the Sahara, knowing that more than half of them would die, and then go back and do the same foolishness again? These kind of reports are anti-Islamic. They are Islamophobic. And we have to ask ourselves why. And last week I posited why, and I'll tell you a story from my childhood. When I was a boy in Trinidad, I joined an organization called the Ansarullah. They changed their name about 4 times. Before that, in the 60s, when I had not even known of them, they were called the Nubian Hebrew Israelite Missionaries. Here's the name, the Hebrew Israelite Nubian Missionaries. Later on in the 70s, when I joined them, they were called Ansarullah. And I understood them to be bona fide Muslims. What I never realized as a boy is the connection between this organization and the Jewish organizations in New York. They would produce kaftans similar to this, but they would have an emblem on here, on the pocket. You would have a crescent, the Muslim crescent, but the star was a Star of David. The first time I took such a garment to my father looked at it and said, "That's a Zionist star. That's a Jewish star. You sure this is a Muslim organization?" I said, "Yes." As time went on, Imam Isa, that's his name, you all know him as Malachi York, for you all who follow what's happening, I think he's still in jail, he's in the 70s now. He was a young man back then. This guy also started to nudge us towards fasting, resting on the Sabbath. You see what's happening now? Now he's nudging us towards resting on the Sabbath. On top of that, he began to say, "I want you all to understand, Ibrahim alayhi salam did not take Ismail for sacrifice. It was Ishaq." Now that, you know that, you're coming from my background, you know that's biblical. You know that's biblical. So you see what's happening here. Now, when I first went to New York to find out, at the time I went, the movement had dissolved. They had moved to Atlanta and had become something to do with ancient Egypt, Kemet. They moved, so he had stopped being a Muslim entirely and moved away. So by the time I went to New York, I went to where the mosque was. The mosque was no longer in use, but still standing there. Across, not very far across the way from the mosque, was the Hasidic Jewish community. And I put 2 and 2 together and said, now I know why Imam Isa was so fluent in Hebrew. The man, he was as conversant with Hebrew as he was with Arabic. So it seems to me, as a young man, he may have attended the yeshiva, the Jewish schools. So people like these were trained to merge Islam and Judaism to the black community. Why? Let's ask why. Because the less pro-Palestinian you can make them, the more you make them sympathetic to Jewish culture and religion, the less pro-Palestinian they'll become. And that's what I think the Jewish lobby was about in New York. That part I neglected to mention, that's why I'm going to keep this short today. That's what I wanted to mention. That book, a lot of this academia by some of these Jewish scholars who have an inordinate interest in Africa, very often they are anti-Islamic, and they do not hide their Islamophobia. And this particular book by Ronald Segat, Islam's Black Slaves, is emblematic of that tradition where our Afrocentrists go and get their Islamophobic attack material from these sort of books. They go and source them from basically Latter-day Orientalists. And it makes me a little bit sad that as a person seeking truth, you should be able to say, yes, Muslims did castrate people. They didn't only castrate black slaves, of shameful report, we also castrated white slaves. But we were not the only people doing it, and we did not start it. And that is what I think a balanced historian should do. The inordinate and unnecessary focus on Muslims, and worse for Muslims, is when we say we never did it at all. We're not doing ourselves any favors by saying, oh, that's all Islamophobia, it's all a pack of lies, Muslims are white as the driven snow, they've never done anything wrong in our lives. Now that is also foolish because you're opening yourself up to unnecessary criticism. What I think we need to do is ask ourselves why certain movements arose. I'm old enough to know, that's why I said to people, I'm old enough to see when the Ansarullah movement arose. My father was one of the first people who pointed out to me that movement is a merger between Judaism and Islam. And next thing you know, we were being encouraged to rest on the Sabbath and to regard the son for sacrifice as Ishaq, not Ismail. So you see so what I'm saying is, why was that happening? From the time of Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, the brand of Islam that was taking shape in America was about change. You had quieter voices like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They were quieter voices. But you had your strident voices like Muhammad Ali. No Viet Cong ever called me a nigger. I am not going to war. That's powerful. That's powerful. You had Brother Malcolm who was saying, African people are our people, and we are going to take this case not as a civil rights issue to the United Nations, but a human rights issue to the United Nations. Now, the world community is looking at this. America and Israel looking at this. If more black people in America become Muslim in that particular cast, in that mold, we have a problem. We will have a problem. So what we have to do is keep these people more along the MLK line of protest, Martin Luther King. Because one thing you can guarantee of, black Christians love Jews. I know, these are my people we're talking about now. Your people, you know our people.
Yes, I know.
You know, maybe you didn't grow up, I grew up back home. And I'll tell you this, you would suddenly see in a large clearing, a massive tent erected out, you know, like how you used to see flying saucers in those sci-fi movies suddenly land? All of a sudden one morning you woke up, you saw a massive tent in a clearing. Next thing under it, benches, a microphone, and a podium. It is, to all intents and purposes, a mobile church. The majority of the congregants who turn up, are our people, women, and their pockets full of cash, because women give. Women are the best fundraisers. They give, they support causes, because they have this mothering, they got this heart, and these venal pastors know this. So they come, and I'll tell you what, you hear our people crying, and the Lord delivered the children of Israel from slavery. And our people, they're crying for Bani Israel, so many thousands of years ago, released from slavery. You ask those same black mothers and grandmothers, Mama, do you cry the same way for our people who spent 400 years in slavery in America right here? Do you do that? Boy, don't talk to me them slavery, them racist. You too racist, boy. Stop, you shut your mouth with that racist stuff. They got our people defraying, disbursing their pockets, emptying their pockets. What it does in the end, because they have linked ancient Israel, the Israelites, to the Israeli modern state, it makes Christians kindly disposed towards Israel. To the extent where they go to Israel and they point their fingers at Palestinian Christians and say, your Christianity is false. You are not practicing the true Christianity. And then you said, but don't you realize that these people have been displaced by these Ashkenazim? These Ashkenazim have replaced these people. Shut your mouth. These are God's people. This is the will of God. They have been returned to their land by God. You can't get past that. So I understand why there was such a reaction to when the Nation of Islam produced the book, The Secret Relationship. Now let me qualify this. In my opinion, The Secret Relationship was a little heavy one-sided. I do believe Jews were some of the financiers in the transatlantic slave trade. They were not the only financiers in the transatlantic slave trade. So I would like to put that here for the purposes of balance. also the Jews of Europe, the Ashkenazi, or even the Sephardim and the Mizrahim, they did not ask to become financiers. There is no, and I like Muslims to understand this, the same way I don't want Afrocentrists taking up negative Islamophobia from Orientalists. I don't want Muslims with this knee-jerk instinctual reaction the minute they hear the word Jew. They want to hate. Stop that. We are not here to hate any individual. We don't hate people. We don't hate religions. We hate the geopolitics that comes out of religion. What they're using the religion for. And Judaism, as it stands in Israel, that's an ethnocracy. It's a state for the Jews. And if they call themselves a race, it's a racial state. It's an apartheid state. So we must fight the apartheid. I'm not fighting the Jew or Judaism. I'm fighting the apartheid quality of the Zionist state of Israel. So that's why I'm now going to make more people hate me and defend them a little. When they were in Europe, they were pushed into ghettos. And being pushed into ghettos, one thing they fell back on, Torah and Talmud. What made them expert at learning was memorizing vast tracts of Sefer Torah and all the different commentaries of the different rabbis. That, I think, Muslim children should still continue to do. Use your mind to memorize at a very early age. The Jewish communities would speak more than one language. They were the earliest cartographers. The first man who did a map depicting somebody like Mansa Kanka Musa in West Africa was a Spanish Jew called Abraham Cresques. So they were a learned people because of their reliance on learning Hebrew. If you're living in France, you're speaking Hebrew and French. So you're bilingual from a very early age. Now, because of this, those people who were not being taught by the monks, who wanted to learn, would employ Jews as teachers. Because the Jews also had a policy in their scripture where they can, if I'm lending to a fellow Jew, I must not take interest. But if you are a non-Jew, a goyim, then I can take interest. The Jews began to amass money like this because Christians believed it was unethical to indulge in usury. Christians believed this. So they pushed the Jews into that profession, and the Jews became wealthy as a result. So we have to actually balance the Jew. I don't like conspiracy theories like the Jews actually planned to control all of Europe since the Middle Ages. I think that's rubbish. They were pushed into a situation, and when you have to survive, you make the best of it. Remember, there's such a thing called pogrom. In Europe, the Arab world didn't know too much about that, except one guy I know called Muhammad Abdul Karim al-Maghili, who did conduct a pogrom into At. I think it's in northern Algeria or Morocco. There was a pogrom there, which some people say resulted in the presence of Jews in Timbuktu. They fled from North Africa across the Sahara, and they were in Timbuktu as traders. Some went to Guinea, and that perhaps accounts for the presence of Jews in Black Africa at that time. But basically, most of the pogroms were in Europe. When a ruler, imagine I'm a king, and I owe this Jewish person a considerable sum of money, and I cannot pay them back. I would incite the population, look, the Christ killers are here. Let's go and kill them. And therefore I kill him, and I don't have to pay him back. The same way Nicolas Sarkozy and Berlusconi, owing Gaddafi a lot of money, couldn't pay him back, so they helped NATO to kill the guy. I just thought I'd throw in a little bit of modern politics to bring us back to where we are today. Right? There's a whole lot of interlocking things here, but basically what I wanted to say about last week is that I did not complete the picture about the secret relationship between blacks and the Jews, the Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam's book, and why there's an abundance of literature that is trying to drive a wedge in the black community between Muslims becoming Muslim and the Afrocentric community. Now, of course, I understand some of the conniptions of the Afrocentric community. The Afrocentric community feels Muslims will not rest until everybody is a Muslim. Now, there is that sense. I understand that feeling in the Afrocentric community. I do not share that feeling. I have the feeling where the Quran says, if he wanted, he could have made everybody Muslim. He could have made everybody one nation. So we are all not one nation. These things are an evolution. They will take time. By dint of superior example, I think is the best way to teach other people, to bring other people to Islam, is by dint of good example. As we say, Islam is about good character. The Prophet says a good character. Unless we display good character, nobody will listen to us. And that's where we have to go. When people start writing articles, I'm going to just round up now. When people start writing articles about, oh, Muslims circumcise black boys, so black people should hate Islam. I said to them, look, recently somebody handed me an article. And in the article, is he allowed to make all that noise? Can he move with that noise, please? You're making noise. I'm recording here. Could you turn it down, please?
I can't scam the CTO.
Could you kindly turn it down, sir?
It'll be over in a second.
Okay.
Calm the fuck down.
Okie dokie. All right. Thank you, sir. So, what was I saying?
About these black boys circumcising.
Yes. Now, what I have learned recently in the kingdom of the Empire of Oyo, the Yoruba Empire, this is pre-Islam, pre-Christianity, there was the practice of eunuchry in that empire. In the Empire of Oyo, before Islam, in Africa, there were empires and kingdoms, and I've been given the example of one, the Yoruba of Western Nigeria, where they have people who have been circumcised. Like I said last week, when you read the New Testament, when Philip spoke to the Ethiopian had not yet converted to Christianity. Nubia, where he came from, wasn't Christian, yet the Ethiopian was a eunuch. How so? So there must be some examples of eunuchry and castration in Africa prior to the arrival of both Christianity and Islam. What I'm saying is also, I'm going to land with another controversial point, because people need to go and do their research. Today we have FGM. Very sensitive subject. Again, Muslims are getting blamed for FGM. We all know that that is not a recommended practice in Islam. What we do know is there's Tahara Sunnah and Tahara Fir'auniyah. Now for anybody here who is a Sudanese, any Sudanese here, any Sudanese here or Nubian will tell you the extreme form of FGM, the extreme cutting, excision and clitoridectomy is called Tahara Fir'auniyah. It's called a pharaonic purification. Now check it out. People tell us we should rely on oral literature sometimes. So I'm relying on oral literature now. Here's what they call FGM, Tahara Fir'auniyah, the pharaonic form of cutting. Doesn't that give an indication that ancient Egyptians used to do it? I'm not saying I'm sure, I'm not saying 100%, but I'm saying to you, if you look at it, as many Christians in Eritrea and Ethiopia do cutting as Muslims in Africa. If you go over to West Africa, there are many Christian West Africans, traditional worshipping West Africans, and Muslim West Africans who practice FGM. So FGM is not exclusive to Muslims, and more than this, it's hardly found in the Arab world. It's more centered to the continent of Africa, and I'm going to repeat this again for people who want to do this research. The word that is used for the extreme form of FGM is called Tahara Fir'auniyah, the pharaonic purification. It must hint, I'm landing, it must hint at it having its origins in ancient Egypt. So when Afrocentrists say to Muslims that they are the cause of all the problems in Africa, they really need to go a little deeper into the history and uncover the different layers. This in no way exonerates anybody practicing FGM today. I am here to say I am firmly against this practice. No, I'm going to land. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go pray. I'm going to give you the microphone. So what I'm going to do, the sister wants to have a word. I'm going to wrap this up now. Thank you all very much once again for your kind attention. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Sister, please.
What I was going to ask him is true that female genital mutilation is practiced in East Africa, for example, they are Christians.
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
Somalia.
Listen.
Somalia, there are more Muslims than Christians. But it's also practiced female genital mutilation. But also what I was asking him is about male genital mutilation. Circumcision, it is a male genital mutilation. No matter how you want to justify it, because of hygiene, because of God said, because of culture said, it is a male genital mutilation, and it should not be implemented as far as I am concerned, because now we have methods and way of keeping our genitals clean, disinfected. Therefore,